Hello, everyone, and welcome to the English YouTuber. Today, we'll be discussing the story The Great Automatic Grammatizator, written by Roald Dahl. So, this story consists of two main protagonists. First is Mr. Bolin, and second is Adolf Knight. So, Mr. Bolin is a very successful and wealthy businessman who has had a breakthrough in the electronic industry. Whereas Adolf Knight is a very passionate writer, but unfortunately, he has been unsuccessful in that field. So, he's very talented, yet a very frustrated electrical engineer. And when Knight is disheartened by the many rejections in the literary world, he decides to build a machine to automatically produce stories, and he understood that this is largely a number game. So let's see what happens through the story, and towards the end, we will discuss the various themes in the story. So let's begin. Well, Knipe, my boy, now that it's finished, I just called you in to tell you I think you've done a fine job. Adolf Knipe stood still in front of Mr. Boland's desk. There seemed to be no enthusiasm in him at all. So they have now just completed something. Mr. Bolan is excited, whereas Naeem isn't enthusiastic at all. Aren't you pleased? Oh, yes, Mr. Bolan. Did you see what the paper said this morning? No, sir, I didn't. The man behind the desk pulled a folded newspaper towards him and began to read. The building of the great automatic computing engine ordered by the government some time ago is now complete. So they have successfully completed and invented an automatic computing engine that was ordered by the government. It is probably the fastest electronic calculating machine in the world today. So it is definitely a big feat. Its function is to satisfy the ever increasing need of science, industry, and administration for rapid mathematical calculation, which in the past, by traditional methods, would have been physically impossible or would have required more time than the problems justified. The speed with which the new engine works, said Mr. John Bolan, head of the firm of electrical engineers, mainly responsible for its construction, may be grasped by the fact that it can provide the correct answer in 5 seconds to a problem that would occupy a mathematician for a month. So here, this automatic computing engine that they have now made can solve complex problems at incredible speed, or you can say lightning speed. In 3 minutes, it can produce a calculation that by hand, if it were possible, would fill 500,000 sheets of foolscap paper. So now swift computation is possible. The automatic computing engine uses pulses of electricity generated at the rate of million a second to solve all calculations that resolve themselves into addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. For practical purpose, there is no limit to what it can do. So Mr. Bolan glanced up at the long, melancholy face of the younger man. So melancholy is sad. So the other person, whose Knight, did not seem too excited at such a wonderful and breathtaking invention that they have made. Aren't you proud, Knight? Aren't you pleased? Of course, Mr. Bolan. I don't think I have to remind you that your own contribution, especially to the original plans, was an important one. In fact, I might go so as far as to say that without you and some of your ideas, this project might still be on the drawing boards today. So now he is appreciating him and saying that without your contribution, this project would have been unsuccessful. So he is appreciating him. So please cheer up. Adolf Knight moved his feet on the carpet and he watched the two small white hands of his chief, the nervous fingers playing with a paperclip, unbending it, straightening out the hairpin curves. He didn't like the man's hands. He didn't like his face either. With the tiny mouth and the narrow purple colored lips, it was unpleasant the way only the lower lip moved when he talked. So there is something that is disturbing Knife, and that is why he is feeling irritation towards his higher associate. Is anything bothering you, Knife? Anything on your mind? Oh no, Mr. Bolan, no. How would you like to take a week's holiday? Do you good. You have earned it. So take a break from this work. I think you are exhausted. And this holiday will do you good. You need a break. Oh, I don't know, sir. The older man waited, watching this tall, thin person who stood so sloppily before him. So sloppily is he is in a very slouched position. He was a difficult boy. Why couldn't he stand up straight? Always drooping and untidy, with spots on his jacket and hair falling all over his face. I'd like you to take a holiday night. You need it. All right, sir, if you wish. Take a week, 2 weeks if you like. Go somewhere warm, get some sunshine, swim, relax, sleep. Then come back and we'll have another talk about the future. Adolf Knight went home by bus to his 2-room apartment. He threw his coat on the sofa, poured himself a drink of whiskey, and sat down in front of the typewriter that was on the table. Mr. Bolan was right. Of course, he was right. So he was right that something was not right. Something was troubling him. Except that he didn't know the half of it. But he's saying, yes, Mr. Bolan did figure out that there was something wrong with me. But he doesn't know what the exact reason is. He probably thought it was a woman. Whenever a young man gets depressed, everybody thinks it's a woman. So there is this perception that exists among people that if ever a young man is troubled, it is because of a woman. So we'll have to figure out now what is it that is disturbing this young man. He leaned forward and began to read through the half-finished sheet of typing still in the machine. So he was typing something. It was headed A Narrow Escape, and it began. The night was dark and stormy. The wind whistled in the trees. The rain poured down like cats and dogs. So here he's used idioms also. Like cats and dogs means it was raining pretty heavily. Adolf Knight took a sip of whiskey, tasting the malty bitter flavor, feeling the trickle of the cold liquid as it traveled down his throat and settled in the top of his stomach. Cool at first, then spreading and becoming warm, making a little area of warmness in the gut. To hell with Mr. John Bolan anyway. And to hell with the great electrical computing machine. To hell with. So, he was cursing Mr. John Bolan as well as the electrical computing machine. At exactly that moment, his eyes and mouth began slowly to open in a sort of wonder, and slowly he raised his head and became still, absolutely motionless, gazing at the wall opposite with this look that was more perhaps of astonishment than of wonder, but quite fixed now, unmoving, and remaining thus for 40, 50, 60 seconds. Then gradually, the head still motionless, a subtle change spreading over the face. So it seems like he was having a eureka moment. He was finding some new great idea. A subtle change spreading over the face, astonishment becoming pleasure. Very slight at first, only around the corners of the mouth, increasing gradually, spreading out until at last the whole face was open wide and shining with extreme delight. It was the first time Adolf Knight had smiled in many, many months. So, just before he was venting out his frustration towards the computing machine, and now there was a delight in his face, and finally he was smiling. Of course, he said, speaking aloud. It's completely ridiculous. Again, he smiled, raising his upper lip and baring his teeth in a queerly sensual manner. So, queerly means in a very strange or unusual manner. It's a delicious idea, but so impractical, it doesn't really bear thinking about it at all. So, he conceives a revolutionary idea. But he says it's a great idea, but I don't think it's practical to think about it. From then on, Adolf Knight began to think about nothing else. The idea fascinated him enormously. At first, because it gave him a promise, however remote, of revenging himself in a most devilish manner upon his greatest enemies. So he conceived an idea where he could seek revenge upon his greatest enemies. So from this, we get to know that Knight, he was dissatisfied with the monotony of his job. He was not very passionate about his current job, and his passion laid somewhere else. From this angle alone, he toyed idly with it for perhaps 10 or 15 minutes. So, with that idea, he briefly entertained the thought without much intent. Then, all at once, he found himself examining it quite seriously as a practical possibility. He took paper and made some preliminary notes, but he didn't get far. He found himself almost immediately up against the old truth that a machine, however ingenious, is capable of original thought. It can handle no problems except those that resolve themselves into mathematical terms, problems that contain one and only one correct answer. So, as he was trying to figure out, he was thinking, yes, the machine can solve extremely complicated problems, but as long as there's only one correct answer. This was a stumper. So, stumper is a difficult problem that can confuse you. There didn't seem any way around it. A machine cannot have a brain. On the other hand, it can have a memory. Can it not? Their own electronic calculator has a marvelous memory. Simply by converting electrical pulses through a column of mercury into supersonic waves, it could store away at least 1,000 numbers at a time, extracting any one of them at the precise moment it was needed. Would it not be possible, therefore, on this principle, to build a memory section of almost unlimited size? No, what about that? So he is now trying to figure out, he's saying, okay, a machine does not have a brain of its own, but it can store unlimited amount of data. So what can I do about that? Then suddenly he was struck by a powerful but simple little truth, and it was this: that English grammar is governed by rules that are almost mathematical in their strictness. So he figured out that Grammar also follows rigid rules and structure. Given the words and given the senses of what is to be said, then there is only one correct order in which those words can be arranged. No, he thought, this isn't quite accurate. In many sentences, there are several alternative positions for words and phrases, all of which may be grammatically correct. So, it is not like mathematics where there is only one defined rule. There are certain exemptions also in grammar that do not follow the rules of grammar, but they are also grammatically correct. But what the hell? The theory itself is basically true. Therefore, it stands to reason that an engine built along the lines of the electric computer could be adjusted to arrange words instead of numbers in their right order according to the rules of grammar. So now he's thinking of building a machine for English, just like how he had built for calculating in maths. Give it the verbs, the nouns, the adjectives, the pronouns, store them in the memory section as a vocabulary, and arrange for them to be extracted as required. Then feed it with plots and leave it to write the sentences. So he's thinking of programming a machine that can publish tailor-made stories by its own, rather than writing it by a person or an author. There was no stopping Knight now. He went to work immediately, and there followed during the next few days a period of intense labor. So now he is focused on finding a solution towards this. The living room became littered with sheets of paper, formulae and calculations, list of words, thousands and thousands of words, the plots of stories, curiously broken up and subdivided, huge extract from Roget's Thesaurus, pages filled with the first names of men and women, hundreds of surnames taken from the telephone directory, intricate drawings of wires and circuits and switches and thermionic valves, drawing of machines that could punch holes of different shapes in little cards, and of a strange electric typewriter that could type 10,000 words a minute. So here he started assembling a lot of different things so that he could make this machine. Also a kind of control panel with a series of small push buttons, each one labeled with the name of a famous American magazine. He was working in a mood of exultation. So exultation is feeling of extreme joy or triumph. Prowling around the room. So prowling is usually done by animals where they move about and wait for the right idea to pounce or wait for the right moment to pounce on. So he was prowling around the room amidst this littering of paper, rubbing his hands together, talking out loud to himself, and sometimes with a sly curl of the nose, he would mutter a series of murderous implications in which the word editor seemed always to be present. On the 15th day of continuous work, so for 2 weeks he was working continuously, he collected the papers into 2 large folders which he carried almost at a run to the offices of John Bolen Inc., electrical engineers. Mr. Bolen was pleased to see him back. Well, Knight, good gracious me, you look 100% better. You have a good holiday? Where did you go? So he had given him 2 weeks of leave so that he could come refreshed and rejuvenated. So he's asking him, where did you go? What did you do? But what does Mr. Bolen figure out? He's just as ugly and untidy as ever, Mr. Bolen thought. So Mr. Bolen had given him the holiday thinking he'll tidy up, come, but he was just as untidy as ever. Why didn't he stand up straight? He looks like a bent stick. You look 100% better, my boy. I wonder what he's grinning about. Every time I see him, his ears seem to have got larger. Adolf Knight placed the folders on the desk. Look, Mr. Boland, he cried. Look at these. Then he poured out his story. He opened the folders and pushed the plans in front of the astonished little man. He talked for over an hour, explaining everything. And when he had finished, he stepped back, breathless, flushed, waiting for the verdict. So he was so passionate about this, and now, after explaining everything for an hour, he was waiting for Mr. Boland's verdict. You know what I think, Knight? I think you are nuts. So he's saying, you know what? I think you're just crazy. Careful now, Mr. Boland thought to himself. Treat him carefully. He's valuable. This one is. So he was like, okay, I have to be careful about my words because I'm walking on thin ice now. I can't lose him. He's a very valuable employee. If only he didn't look so awful with that long horse face and the big teeth. So secretly, Mr. Boland did not like the appearance of Knight. The fellow has ears as big as rhubarb leaves. But Mr. Boland, it'll work. I have proved to you it'll work. You can't deny that. So here what happens, Mr. Boland first is completely dismissive of this idea. He's saying, no, you're crazy. This is definitely not going to work. But Knight is trying to convince him. Adolf Knight watched his man, disliking him more every second. This idea, Mr. Boland's lower lip was saying, is very ingenious. I might almost say brilliant. And it only goes to confirm my opinion of your abilities, Knight. But don't take it too seriously. He's saying, yes, I am convinced that you are an amazing person. It is an ingenious idea. I have no doubt about your abilities. But don't take all this too seriously. After all, my boy, what possible use can it be to us? Who on earth wants a machine for writing stories? So he's saying that, no, why would someone want a machine to write stories? And where's the money? How am I going to mint money out of this? Just tell me that. May I sit down, sir? Sure, take a seat. Adolf Knight seated himself on the edge of a chair. The older man watched him with alert brown eyes, wondering what was coming now. I would like to explain something, Mr. Boland, if I may, about how I came to do all of this. So now he wanted to convince him that it would be a profitable venture. Go right ahead, Knight. He would have to be humored a little now. So he's saying, okay, let's listen to your idea, because Mr. Boland realized that to manage Knight or to keep peace with him, he would have to go along with his idea and listen to him. The boy was really valuable, a sort of genius, almost worth his weight in gold to the firm. Just look at these papers here. Darndest thing you ever saw. Astonishing piece of work. Quite useless, of course. No commercial value. But it proved again the boy's ability. So he's saying that he's done an amazing piece of work. He's so valuable as gold. But again, I don't see any commercial value in this. It's useless. But the boy has great ability. It's a sort of confession, I suppose, Mr. Boland. I think it explains why I've always been so kind of worried. So now he is bearing out his chest and saying, okay, now I'm going to explain. You tell me anything you want, Knight. I am here to help you. You know that. The young man clasped his hands together, tight on his lap, hugging himself with his elbows. It seems as though suddenly he was feeling very cold. You see, Mr. Boland, to tell the honest truth, I don't really care much for my work here. So now he's saying that, you know what, I don't really like my work here. My passion isn't here. I know I'm good at it and all that sort of thing, but my heart's not in it. It's not what I want to do most. Up went Bolan's eyebrows, quick like a spring. His whole body became very still. You see, sir, all my life I wanted to be a writer. A writer? Yes, Mr. Bolan. You may not believe it, but every bit of spare time I have had, I've spent writing stories. In the last 10 years, so Naip has been writing for a decade. I have written hundreds, literally hundreds of short stories, 566 to be precise, approximately one a week. Good heavens, man! What on earth did you do that for? All I know, sir, is that I have the urge. So he has the urge to write. He enjoys it. What sort of urge? The creative urge, Mr. Bolan. Every time he looks up, he saw Mr. Bolan's lips. They were growing thinner and thinner, more and more purple. And may I ask you what you do with these stories, Knight? Well, sir, that's the trouble. No one will buy them. Each time I finish, I sent it out on the rounds. It goes to one magazine after another. That's all that happens, Mr. Bolan, and they simply send them back. It's very depressing. So here, what happens is even though he is really passionate about writing, he has this creative urge, he writes hundreds of stories, but they never gets accepted in the publishing industry and it never gets published. And that is why it is quite depressing. And that is why he has this idea, which is kind of seeking revenge upon his greatest enemies. That is, who are his enemies? The other authors whose stories are being published. So, this is a way of revenge that he is seeking from them. Mr. Bolan relaxed. I can see quite well how you feel, my boy. So now he's trying to be very empathetic. His voice was dipping with sympathy. We all go through it one time or the other in our lives. But now that you've had proof, positive proof from the expert themselves, from the editors, that your stories are, what shall I say, rather unsuccessful, it's time to leave off. So now he's saying, see, listen, it's good that you are doing all this. But now we have got proof that, so he's hesitant to say that they are not good. So you know what? Just get rid of this. Forget it, my boy. Just forget all about it. So he's trying to dissuade him from following this passion of his. So Mr. Bolan still does not see any kind of financial gains from this, and that is why he is dissuading the boy from following this idea. So Naip says, no, Mr. Bolan, no, that's not true. I know my stories are good. My heavens, when you compare them with the stuff some of those magazines print, oh my word, Mr. Bolan, the sloppy, boring stuff that you see in the magazines week after week, why? It drives me mad. Wait a minute, my boy. Do you ever read the magazines, Mr. Bolan? You will pardon me, Naip, but what's all this got to do with your machine? Everything, Mr. Bolan, absolutely everything. What I want to tell you is, I have made a study of magazines, and it seems that each one tends to have its own particular type of story. So each magazine has a very particular kind of genre and a type of story. The writers, the successful ones, you know this, and they write accordingly. So one kind of story becomes successful and the writers stick to that. Just a minute, my boy. Calm yourselves down, will you? I don't think all of this is getting us anywhere. So he still doesn't think this is going to work. Please, Mr. Bolan, hear me through. It's all terribly important. He paused to catch his breath. He was properly worked up now, throwing his hands around as he talked. The long, toothy face with the big ears on either sides simply shone with enthusiasm, and there was an excess of saliva in his mouth, which caused him to speak his words wet. So he was very enthusiastic about this, and he was moving his hands around, and there was so much saliva in his mouth, and whatever he spoke, it he used to spit out saliva as well. So you see, on my machine, by having an adjustable coordinator between the plot memory section and the word memory section, I am able to produce any type of story I desire simply by pressing the required button. Yes, I know, Naip, I know. This is all very interesting. But what's the point of it? Saying I get all of this, it's very interesting. No, but what's the point? Just this, Mr. Boland, the market is limited. We have got to be able to produce the right stuff at the right time whenever we want it. It's a matter of business, that's all. I'm looking at it from your point of view now. So before he used to look at it from an author point of view, when he used to put in his creative juices and write stories. But now he's saying, you know what? I'm no longer thinking about all of that. I'm now going to think just like you, how it is going to mint money. I'm going to think of it as a business proposition, a commercial proposition, rather than it being a form of art. So, because he's so disheartened by his rejection, now he is thinking of it from the money point of view. My dear boy, it can't possibly be a commercial proposition ever. You know as well as I do what it costs to build one of these machines. Now, how are we going to make a profit out of it? These machines cost a bomb. Yes, sir, I do. But with due respect, I don't believe you know what the magazines pay writers for stories. So he's like, you don't know, but what? The magazines pay these authors for writing the stories. What do they pay? Anything up to $2,500. It probably averages around 1,000. Mr. Boland jumped. Yes, sir, it's true. Almost impossible, knife, ridiculous, sir. He did not know that writers could make so much money. So he's highlighting its commercial prospects. You mean to sit there and tell me that these magazines pay out money like that to a man for just for scribbling of a story? Good heavens, Knight, whatever's next. Writers must all be millionaires. So he's saying, oh my god, if they're making so much money, then all of them would be millionaires. That's exactly it, Mr. Boland. That's where the machines come in. Listen a minute, sir. While I tell you some more, I've got it all worked out. The big magazines are carrying approximately 3 fiction stories in each issue. So now he's trying to explain to him. Now take the 15 most important magazines, the one paying the most money. A few of them are monthlies, but most of them come out every week. Alright. That makes, let us say, about 40 big stories being brought each week. That's $40,000. So with our machine, when we get it working properly, we can collar nearly the whole of this market. My dear boy, you are mad. No, sir, honestly, it's true what I say. Don't you see that with volumes alone, we'll completely overwhelm them because we can print these stories within seconds. This machine can produce a 5,000 word story all typed and ready for dispatch in a mere 30 seconds. How can the writers compete with that? I ask you, Mr. Boland, how? So Naip is saying that we will publish stories so fast that these writers will never be able to compete with us. At that point, Adolf Naip noticed a slight change in the man's expression, an extra brightness in the eyes, the nostrils distending, the whole face becoming still, almost rigid. Quickly he continued. Nowadays, Mr. Bolan, the handmade article hasn't a hope. So he's saying that now, you know what? These articles written by hand, they have no hope. It can't possibly compete with mass production, especially in this country. You know that carpets, chairs, shoes, bricks, crockery, anything you like to mention, they're all made by machines now. So now he's saying that handmade items don't have any kind of importance. If you see in every other industry, everything is machine made now. The quality may be inferior, but that doesn't matter. It's the cost of production that counts. So he's saying that nowadays people want cheap mass produced items rather than original work or handmade things of quality work. And stories, well, they are just another product like carpets and chairs. And no one cares how you produce them as long as you deliver the goods. He's saying that now even stories are like that. He's saying that it doesn't matter if the writing style and the intimate human elements are missing. As long as we get the work done, that is important. We'll sell them wholesale, Mr. Bolan. We'll undercut every writer in the country. Undercut means we will sell at a lower price than everybody. So people will just want our stories than theirs. We'll corner the market. So we will capture the entire market. Mr. Bolan edged up straighter in his chair. He was leaning forward now. So now he is showing keen interest. Both elbows on the desk, the face alert, the small brown eyes resting on the speaker. I still think it's impracticable, Naib, so still he's not a fully 100% into this idea. 40,000 a week, cried Adolf Naib. And if we half the price, making it 20,000 a week, that's still $1 million a year. And softly he added, you didn't get any million a year for building the old electronic calculator, did you, Mr. Bolan? So he's saying this idea is better than the calculator idea. But seriously now, Naif, do you really think they'll buy them? So he's saying that, do you really think this is going to work out? Listen, Mr. Bolan, who on earth is going to want custom made stories when they can get the other kind at half the price? So even the publishing industry, even they would want stories that are cheaper. It stands to reason, doesn't it? And how will you sell them? Who will you say has written them? Well, we'll set up our own literary agency and we'll distribute them through that. And we'll invent all the names we want for the writer. So he'll say we'll make up names for writers and we will sell it through literary agency. I don't like it, Naip. To me, the smack of trickery does it not. So he's saying that I don't want to get into dishonest means and do all kinds of trickery. And another thing, Mr. Bolan, there's all manners of valuable byproduct once you have all started. Take advertising, for example. Beer manufacturers and people like that are willing to pay good money these days if famous writers will lend their names to their products. Why, my heavens, Mr. Bolan? This isn't any children's plaything we're talking about. It's big business. So he's saying that it's not any kind of kiddish thing. We're talking about big business where we are going to make millions of dollars. Don't get too ambitious, my boy. And another thing, there isn't any reason why we should put your name, Mr. Bolan, on some of the better stories if you wish to. So now he's saying, you know what? There is no reason why we should not put your name in some of the stories. My goodness, Nipe, what should I want that for? I don't know, sir, except for that, some writers get to be very much respected, like Mr. Eric Gardner or Kathleen Morris, for example. We've got to have names. And I was certainly thinking of using my own on one or two stories just to help out. So he's saying that, you know what? Not only are you going to get monetary benefits, that is, you're going to mint money out of it, but it will also give you fame and respect if your names are on it. A writer, huh? Mr. Bolan said, musing. Well, it would surely surprise them over at the club when they saw my name in the magazine, the good magazine. So now he's like, okay, he is finally getting interested. That's right, Mr. Bolan. For a moment, a dreamy, faraway look came into Mr. Bolan's eyes and he smiled. Then he stirred himself and began leafing through the plans that lay before him. One thing I don't quite understand, Naik, where do the plots come from? The machines can't possibly invent plots because he's like, yes, a machine doesn't have brain of its own to invent plots. So how are they going to come about? We feed those in, sir. That's no problem at all. Everyone has plots. There's 300 or 400 of them written down in that folder there on your left. Feed them straight into the plot memory section of the machine. Go on. There are many other little refinements too, Mr. Bolan. You see them all when you study the plans carefully. For example, there's a trick that nearly every writer uses of inserting at least one long, obscure word into each story. So he's like, there's a trick that every author usually inserts one or two great vocabulary into the story. This makes the reader think that the man is very wise and clever. So I have the machine to do the same thing. There'll be a whole stack of long words stored away just for this purpose, where once in a while we'll add those vocabularies also so that the author sounds smart and intelligent. Where? In the word memory section, he said epexegetically. So epexegetically means the act of adding a phrase to clarify the previous point. Through most of that day, the two men discussed the possibilities of the new engine. In the end, Mr. Bolan said he would have to think about it some more. The next morning, he was quite enthusiastic. Within a week, he was completely sold on the idea. What we'll have to do, Naip, is to say that we are merely building another mathematical calculator, but of a new type that will keep the secret. So it's like we're going to keep this among us. We are not going to disclose this idea to others. Exactly, Mr. Bolan. And in 6 months, the machine was completed. It was housed in a separate brick building in the back of the premises. And now that it was ready for action, no one was allowed near it excepting Mr. Bolan and Adolph Knight. It was an exciting moment where the two men, the one short, plump, brevite. So brevite means an animal with short legs. So here he wants to say that one of the man was short, plump, had short legs. The other tall, thin and toothy. Stood in the corridor before the control panel and got ready to run off the first story. All around them were walls dividing up into many small corridors, and the walls were covered with wiring and plugs and switches and huge glass valves. They were both nervous. Mr. Bolan hopping from one foot to the other, quite unable to keep still. So they were really excited and nervous. Which button? Adolph Knight asked, eyeing a row of small white discs that resembled the keys of a typewriter. You choose, Mr. Bolan. Lots of magazines to pick from. Saturday Evening Post, Collier's, Ladies' Home Journal, anyone you like. Goodness me, boy, how do I know? He was jumping up and down like a man with hives. So hives is a skin condition where there is intense itching. So he was jumping up and down like he has hives. Mr. Bolan, Adolph Knight said gravely, do you realize that at this moment, With your little finger alone, you have it in your power to become the most versatile writer on this continent? Listen, Knipe, just get on with it, will you please? And cut out the preliminaries. So he's saying, okay, let's cut to the chase and let's just get over with it. Okay, Mr. Bolan, then we'll make it. Let me see. This one? How's that? He extended one finger and pressed down a button with the name Today's Woman printed across it in diminutive black type. Diminutive means which is smaller than usual. There was a sharp click, and when he took his finger away, the button remained down below the level of others. So much for the selection, he said. Now here we go. He reached up and pulled a switch on the panel. Immediately, the room was filled with a loud humming noise and a crackling of electric sparks and the jingle of many tiny, quickly moving levers. And almost in the same instant, sheets of quarto paper began sliding out from a slot to the right of the control panel and dropping into a basket below. They came out quickly, one sheet a second, and in less than half a minute it was all over. The sheets stopped coming. That's it, cried Knipe. There's your story. They grabbed the sheets and began to read. The first one they picked up and started as follows. So it was gibberish. They looked at the others. The style was roughly similar in all of them. Mr. Bolan began to shout. The younger man tried to calm him down. So, now Mr. Bolan was furious because the magazine did not make sense. It's all right, sir. Really it is. It only needs a little adjustment. We've got a connection somewhere that is wrong. That's all. You must remember, Mr. Bolan, there are over 1,000,000 feet of wiring in this room. You can't expect everything to be right first time. It'll never work, Mr. Bolan said. So again, he's lost all hope. He's saying that is not going to work at all. Be patient, sir. Be patient. Adolf Knipe set out to discover the fault, and in 4 days' time, he announced that all was ready for the next try. It'll never work, Mr. Bolan said. I know it'll never work. Knipe smiled and pressed the selector button marked Reader's Digest. Then he pulled the switch, and again the strange, exciting humming sound filled the room. One page of transcript flew out of the slot into the basket. Where's the rest? Mr. Bolan cried. It stopped. It's gone wrong. No, sir, it hasn't. It's exactly right. It's for the digest, don't you see? This time it began. Few people yet know that our revolutionary cure has been discovered, which may well bring permanent relief to sufferers of the most dreaded disease over them, and so on. It's gibberish, Mr. Bolan shouted. No, sir, it's fine. Can't you see? It's simply that she's not breaking up the words. So there's no space between the words. That's an easy adjustment. But the story's there. Look, Mr. Bolan, look. It's all there except that the words are joined together. And indeed it was. So he said that it just needs a small technical tweaking. That's it. Other than that, it is perfectly all right. The next try, a few days later, everything was perfect, even the punctuation. The first story that ran off for a famous women's magazine was a solid, plotty story of a boy who wanted to better himself with his rich employer. This boy arranged so that story went for a friend to hold up the rich man's daughter on a dark night when she was driving home. Then the boy himself happened by, knocked the gun out of his friend's hand and rescued the girl. The girl was grateful, but the father was suspicious. That something was wrong. He questioned the boy sharply. The boy broke down and confessed that He had done this to look good. Then the father, instead of kicking him out of the house, said that he admired the boy's resourcefulness. The girl admired his honesty and his looks. The father promised him to be head of the accounts department and the girl married him. So this was the story that was published. It's tremendous, Mr. Bolin. It's exactly right. Seems a bit sloppy to me, my boy. So he's saying that doesn't seem good. In his excitement, Adolf Knight promptly ran off six more stories in as many minutes, all of them except one, which for some reason came out a trifle lewd, seemed entirely satisfactory. So all of them came perfectly except one, which was slightly offensive. Mr. Bolan was now mollified. So mollified means he was less upset. He agreed to set up a literary agency in an office downtown and to put Knipe in charge. In a couple of weeks, this was accomplished. Then Knipe mailed out the first dozen stories. He put his own name in four of them, Mr. Boland's to one, and for the others, he simply invented names. So finally, they have set up the literary agency and they are sending out stories. Five of these stories were promptly accepted. The one with Mr. Boland's name on it was turned down with a letter from the fiction editor saying, "This is a skillful job, but in our opinion, it doesn't quite come off. We would like to see more of this writer's work." Adolf Knight took a cab out to the factory and ran off another story for the same magazine. He again put Mr. Boland's name to it and mailed it immediately. That one they bought. The money started pouring in. Knipe slowly and carefully stepped up the output, and in 6 months' time, he was delivering 30 stories a week and selling about half. He began to make a name for himself in the literary circle as a prolific and successful writer. Prolific means producing a lot. So when he was really writing the story out of his heart, not even one got accepted. But now, when he used trickery, he used machines, and those stories, when he wrote his name, all those stories got accepted. At the same time, Knipe was building up a dozen or more fictitious persons as promising young authors. Everything was going fine. At this point, it was decided to adapt the machine for writing novels as well as stories. Mr. Bolan, thirsty now for greater honors in the literary world. So, now he was greedy. Insisted that Knipe go to work at once on this prodigious task. Prodigious means this task that is of remarkable size. So if you see the same person who was hesitant to use dishonest means, and he says that I am not okay with this smack of trickery, has now not only accepted it, but he's thirsty for even greater honors where he wants to have novels under his name. I want to do a novel, he kept saying, I want to do a novel. And so you will, sir, so you will. But please be patient. This is a very complicated adjustment I have to make. So now Mr. Bolan is anxious, he is impatient. But Knife is telling him, listen, a novel is quite different to a short story and a lot of adjustments that I have to make. Everyone tells me I ought to do a novel, Mr. Bolan cried. All sorts of publishers are chasing after me day and night, begging me to stop fooling around with stories and do something really important instead. A novel's the only thing that counts, and that's what they say. We're going to do novels, Knight told him, just as many as we want, but please be patient. Now listen to me, Knight. What I'm going to do is a serious novel. something that'll make sit up and take notice. I've been getting rather tired of the sort of stories you've been putting my name to lately. As a matter of fact, I'm not too sure you haven't been trying to make a monkey out of me. So he's saying that, listen, I want to make like a serious novel where people are just going to sit and read it seriously. He's saying that, have you been putting my names in things to make a fool out of me? Oh, monkey, Mr. Boland. So he's like, now you're accusing me that I'm trying to make a fool out of you? Keeping all the best ones for yourself. That's what you've been doing. So now he's accusing him of keeping the good ones to him and on the not so great ones, putting Mr. Boland's name. Oh no, Mr. Boland, no. So this time I'm going to make damn sure I write a high class, intelligent book. You understand that? Look, Mr. Boland, with the sort of switchboard I'm rigging up, you will be able to write any sort of book you want. And this was true. For within another couple of months, this genius of Adolf Knipe had not only adapted the machine for novel writing, but had constructed a marvelous new control system which enabled the author to pre select literally any type of plot and any style of writing he desired. There were so many dials and levers on the thing. It looked like the instrument panel of some enormous aeroplane. First, by depressing one of a series of master buttons, that is, by pressing one of the buttons, the writer made his primary decision, that is, the genre. Historical, satirical, philosophical, political, romantic, erotic, humorous, or straight. Then from the second row, the basic buttons. He chose his theme: army life, pioneer days, civil war, world war, racial problems, Wild West, country life, childhood memories, seafaring, the C button, and many, many more. The third row of buttons gave a choice of literary style, that is, whether it is classical, whimsical, racy, or whether it is written by a type of author like Hemingway, Faulkner, Joyce, whether it is feminine, etc. The fourth row was for characters. The fifth for wordage, that is, the word count, and so on. 10 long rows of pre-selector buttons. But that wasn't all. Controls had also to be exercised during the actual writing process, which took about 15 minutes per novel. And to do this, the author had to sit, as it were, in the driver's seat and pull or push a button of labeled stops as an organ. By so doing, he was able continually to modulate or merge 50 different and variable qualities such as tension, surprise, humor, pathos, and mystery. Numerous dials were gauges on the dashboard itself, told him throughout exactly how far along he was with his work. So these were all the technical things that were included during the process of novel writing. Finally, there was the question of passion. From a careful study of the books at the top of the bestseller list for the past year, Adolf Knipe had decided that this was the most important ingredient of all. A magical catalyst that somehow or other could transform the dullest novel into a howling success. At any rate, financially. But Knipe also knew that passion was powerful, heady stuff, and must be prudently dispensed. So, something that has to be very carefully used, not a lot. The right proportion at the right moments, and to ensure this, he had devised an independent control consisting of two sensitive sliding adjusters operating by foot pedals similar to the throttle and brake in a car. So, Passion was something that was very important, but yet you had to use it sparsely and carefully and sensibly. So it was like a throttle that one pushes, like a brake in a car. One pedal governed the percentage of passion to be injected, and the other regulated its intensity. There was no doubt, of course, and this was the only drawback, that the writing of a novel by the Knipe method was going to be rather than flying a plane and driving a car and playing an organ all at the same time. So it was a little complicated. When all was ready, he proudly escorted Mr. Bolan into the machine house and began to explain the operating procedure for the new wonder that he had created. Good God, Knife, I'll never be able to do all that. Damn it, man. It'll be easier to write the thing by hand. So it's like, this is so complicated. You'll soon get used to it, Mr. Bolan. I promise you. In a week or two, you'll be doing it without hardly thinking. It's just like learning to drive. So just like how then we drive through muscle memory, you will be able to handle this like that. You just need a little practice. Well, it wasn't quite as easy as that, but after many hours of practice, Mr. Bolan began to get the hang of it. And finally, late one evening, he told Knight to make ready for running off the first novel. It was a tense moment, with the fat little man crouching nervously in the driver's seat and the tall, toothy Knight fussing excitedly around him. I intend to write an important novel, Knight. I'm sure you will, sir. I'm sure you will. With one finger, Mr. Bolan carefully pressed the necessary pre-selector buttons. The master button was satirical. Subject, racial problem. Style, classical. Characters, 6 men, 4 women, 1 infant. Length, 15 chapters. At the same time, he had his eye particularly upon 3 organ stops marked power, mystery, and profundity. So profundity is great insight or wisdom. Are you ready, sir? Yes, yes, I'm ready. Knight pulled the switch. The great engine hummed. There was a deep, whirring sound from the oiled movement of 50,000 cogs and rods and levers. Then came the drumming of the rapid electrical typewriter, setting up a shrill, almost intolerable clatter. Out into the basket flew the typewritten pages, one every 2 seconds. But what with the noise and the excitement and having to play upon the stops and watch the chapter counter and the pace indicator and the passion gauge, Mr. Bolan began to panic. He reacted in precisely the way a learner driver does in a car, by pressing both feet hard down on the pedals and keeping them there until the thing stopped. So, because he was so nervous with so many things happening at the same time, he pressed both the pedals of passion so hard until the end. Congratulations on your first novel, Knipe said, picking up the great bundle of typed pages from the basket. Little pearls of sweat were oozing out all over Mr. Bolan's face. It sure was hard work, my boy. But you got it done, sir, you got it done. Let me see it, Knipe. How does it read? He started to go through the first chapter, passing each finished page to the younger man. Good heavens, Knipe, what's this? Mr. Bolan's thin purple fish lips was moving slightly as it mouthed the words. His cheeks were beginning slowly to inflate. But look here, Knipe, this is outrageous. I must say it's a bit fruity, sir. Fruity means it's a little eccentric or it is a little bizarre. Fruity? It's perfectly revolting. I can't possibly put my name to this. Quite right, sir, quite right. Knipe, is this some nasty trick you've been playing on me? Oh, no, sir, no, no. It certainly looks like it. You don't think, Mr. Bolan, that you might have been pressing a little hard on the passion control pedals. Do you? My dear boy, how should I know? Why don't you try again? So Mr. Boland ran off a second novel, and this time it went according to plan. Within a week, the manuscript had been read and accepted by an enthusiastic publisher. Knipe followed with one in his own name, and they made a dozen more for good measure. In no time at all, Adolph Knipe's literary agency had become famous for its large stable of promising young novelists. So these are not real novelists, but them just writing random names on them. And once again, the money started rolling in. It was at this stage that young Knipe began to display a real talent for big business. See here, Mr. Bolan, he said, we've still got too much competition. Why don't we just absorb all the other writers in the country? So now they had a good literary setup. They published machine generated stories under various fictitious names. And now he's like, why don't we take out the other competitors? That means who are real writers. Mr. Bolan, who now sported a bottle green velvet jacket and allowed his hair to cover two-thirds of his ears, was quite content with things that the way they were. Don't know what you mean, my boy. You just can't absorb writers. Of course you can, sir. Exactly like Rockefeller did with his oil companies. Simply buy them out, and if they won't sell, squeeze them out. It's easy. Careful now, Knipe. Be careful. So, what was Knipe's idea? So, Knipe masterminds a plan to monopolize writing by persuading published authors to never write again. And in return, he would give them money and asking them to lend their names to be written on machine generated stories. I've got a list here, sir, of 50 of the most successful writers in the country. And what I intend to do is offer each one of them a lifetime contract with pay. All they have to do is undertake never to write another word and, of course, to let us use their names on our own stuff. How about that? They'll never agree. You don't know writers, Mr. Bolan. You watch and see. Creative urge, Knipe. It's bunk. So he's saying that all that they're really interested in is money, just like everybody else. So there's nothing like creative urge. Now all the writers want is just money. In the end, Mr. Bolan reluctantly agreed to give it a try, and Knipe, with his list of writers in his pocket, went off in a large chauffeur-driven Cadillac to make his calls. He journeyed first to the man at the top of the list, a very great and wonderful writer, and he had no trouble getting into the house. He told his story and produced a suitcase full of sample novels and a contract for the man to sign, which guaranteed him so much a year for life. The man listened politely, decided he was dealing with a lunatic, gave him a drink, and then firmly showed him the door. So it did not work with the first author because he thought this guy was a lunatic. The second writer on the list, when he saw Knipe was serious, actually attacked him with a large metal paperweight. And the inventor had to flee down the garden, followed by such a torrent of abuse and obscenity as he had never heard before. But it took more than this to discourage Adolph Knipe. He was disappointed, but not dismayed. And off he went in his big car to seek his next client. This one was a female, famous and popular, whose fat romantic books sold by the million across the country. She received Knipe graciously, gave him tea, and listened attentively to his story. It all sounds very fascinating, she said, but of course I find it a little hard to believe. Madam, Knipe answered, come with me and see it with your own eyes. My car awaits you. So he's like, you don't believe me? Please come. So off they went, and in due course, the astonished lady was ushered into the machine house where the wonder was kept. Eagerly, Knight explained its workings, and after a while, he even permitted her to sit in the driver's seat and practice with the buttons. All right, he said suddenly. You want to do a book now? Oh, yes, she cried, please. She was very competent and seemed to know exactly what she wanted. She made her own pre selections, then ran off a long, romantic, passion filled novel. She read through the first chapter and became so enthusiastic that she signed up on the spot. That's one of them out of the way, Knight said to Mr. Bolden afterwards. A pretty big one, too, because she sold her books in millions. And she was a well established author. Nice work, my boy. And you know why she signed? Why? It wasn't the money. She's got plenty of money. Then why? Knight grinned, lifting his lip and baring a long, pale upper gum. Simply because she saw the machine made stuff was better than her own. So she thought that the machine one was a lot better than what she was capable to write. And she's like, okay, now let the machine do its work for me. Thereafter, Knight wisely decided to concentrate only upon mediocrity. So, not to go and visit the best authors, but ones who were mediocre in their work. Anything better than that, and there were so few it didn't matter much, was apparently not quite so easy to seduce. So, what he came to know that the great authors were very few and it did not matter much. And he also realized that they were not quite easy to seduce, that is, to convince to give up their writing. So he thought he better settle on mediocre writers who were plenty of them. In the end, after several months of work, he had persuaded something like 70% of the writers on his list to sign the contract. He found that the older ones, those who were running out of ideas, had taken to drink. So people who were on the writer's block, who could not think of ideas, had started to drink. And they were the easiest to handle. The younger people were more troublesome. They were apt to become abusive, sometimes violent when he approached them. And more than once, Knife was slightly injured on his rounds. But on the whole, it was a satisfactory beginning. This last year, the first full year of the machine's operation, it was estimated that at least one half of all the novels and stories published in the English language were produced by Adolf Knipe upon the great automatic grammatizator. Does this surprise you? I doubt it. Because he had pressurized and convinced a lot of these writers to cave in. And worse is yet to come. Today, as the secret spreads, many more are hurrying to tie up with Knife. And all the time, the screw turns tighter for those who hesitate to sign their names. So, many are hurrying to tie up with Mr. Knife, and there are some who are pressurized to sign their name. This very moment, as I sit here listening to the howling of my 9 starving children in the other room, I can feel my own hands creeping closer and closer to that golden contract that lies over on the other side of the desk. So he's saying the narrator is trapped in a deeply agonizing situation. He has to make an unbearable choice between family and moral boundary. He's saying that I can listen to my children howling with hunger, that it makes me want to go and choose the contract so that I can have money to feed my kids. The last sentence is, give us strength, O Lord, to let our children starve. So he's saying that, please give me strength so that he does not have to choose the unethical path out of because of desperation. So this was the story. Now let's go into the various themes that are there in the story. So the first theme is human creativity versus mechanization. The story compares the unique creativity of human versus the automized machine produced stories. While the machine is perfectly capable of producing grammatically perfect stories, it lacks emotional depth, uniqueness, and genuine experiences that the author weaves into a story. The second is art reduced to a mass produced good. In the story, the art of story writing was reduced to a mass produced commodity, just like carpets, shoes, and so on, where the quality, in spite of being inferior, doesn't matter. Knipe says that no one cares about how the product is produced as long as the goods are delivered and the cost of production is low. The machine production only prioritized efficiency and profit and destroyed the soul of literature. Next is moral integrity. Though Mr. Bolan was hesitant to use trickery and dishonest means to make money, he gets swayed to use machine produced stories under his name. When he saw that he would get fame, respect, and monetary benefits, thus, in order to chase money, fame, and recognition, all his ethical values were gone, and he no longer hesitated to use trickery and moral conniving. The next is desire for authority and control. After being rejected umpteen number of times by the publishing industry, Knipe wanted power and authority over the publishing industry. Therefore, the greed to dominate the industry, he eventually strips the authenticity and genuineness of the publishing industry and pressurizes the authors to give in by offering them lucrative money and also pressurize people in desperate situation where out of desperation they would have to choose the unethical path. So while trapped in deeply agonizing unbearable situation, they had to choose between family and money rather than moral boundary. So these are the various themes in this story. I'm so glad that you watched this video until the end. This was a really long story, isn't it? Please share this video among your batchmates and make sure that you study really well. Don't wait until the last moment. Keep studying and revising. All the very best for your examinations. God bless.